So as you guys know, this weekend I streamed Tengumania 6, and during that time we had quite the diverse top cut, as well as just representation within the format. This was a great way for people to test for YCS Vegas. We had a lot of new faces in the tournament. We saw 48 players, which is pretty good for our tournaments. And one thing I want to talk about is going through all the decks. You know, I'm sure you guys are interested in what deck list topped. And unfortunately, Photo Shooty did not quite have enough time to make his graphic, but I need to record this video now, so that's what we're doing, right? So I just threw everything into a spreadsheet, all the decks, and then put out some little numbers just so we have an idea of how many of each deck there was. So if we'll just kind of go down the list, talk about what representation we had. And if we go right off the bat, you know, agents at the top, this was far and away the most represented deck if you count trooper agents as agents as well. So that's like we had 9 agents, or 7 and 2 if you want to like count trooper agents as like a separate deck. Slightly different playstyle, but it's still agents. We had Alien Falcon Punch. Not sure how well this deck did. I didn't really see it. We had 3 Cat Sith Chaos. We had a single Cloudian Synchro. We had 2 Crusher Control. This deck was seeing, you know, it's been seeing a bit more representation. The deck honestly is not that bad. It's been doing kind of well. 2 Dragoonity, 1 GenX, 1 Gladiator Beast, 2 Gravekeeper. We had 5 Hero Beat, 1 Infernity, 2 Jurak, 1 Karakuri, 1 Morphtronics, 1 Nordic, 1 Robin Goblin Toolbox. I did manage to catch this on stream. We did see some cool plays with like Spirit Reaper swinging direct with like a Robin Goblin flip to like snipe 2. It was kind of cool, and honestly, it didn't do that bad. It was really interesting. 2 Scraps, and then 3 TG Stun. And then Tengu Plants was the second most represented deck with 7 in the pool, and then 1 Vayu Turbo, 1 Zombie mid-range. So we'll kind of talk about this a bit deeper, but it was kind of interesting. We obviously saw a lot of Tengu Plants and a lot of agents, but the conversion rate to top 8 was not that great for these 2 decks. It's honestly kind of impressive because there was a lot of one-off decks that actually were quite successful in this tournament. So we'll kind of hop over. So starting right out the gate, an unfortunate bubbler here was Amazing Mike Man on his Jurak list. Looks like he updated things a bit. We're opting for 2 Upstart Goblin instead of we're not on 3 for some reason. Just didn't quite have the space for 3. But I understand the merit of like, hey, I want to see my good cards really quickly, right? So you know, we're going for Upstart just to get the consistency. You need to get access to Velo. If you don't see Velo, the deck feels pretty bad. This deck performed really well, and like I said, it just bubbled to not make top cut, just tiebreakers and whatnot. But overall, performed really well. This card was a huge card this weekend. I saw a ton of people on Black Horn of Heaven. It's a really spicy card. It's pretty interesting. So, you know, it actually performed really well alongside things like Thunder King and stuff like that versus like Chaos and Agents and stuff. But yeah, it was pretty cool. Overall, you know, it's a relative, like, you know, it's Jurax, but you know, I do think it's cool to see that this deck is still finding some form of success. Obviously, it didn't quite make top cut, but, you know, any little thing could have changed that. It was very close. The next thing I want to talk about is Rip Kid No Cry. Entered with Vayu Turbo and also just barely bubbled. And this list was really cool. Like, honestly, I saw a few matches where it was kind of really swingy, as in, like, both players saw like either DAD or BLS, so like the games were just going really quick. It was like really early on, you know, the DB1 of algorithm. But overall, this list performed really well, and it was super cool to see that they were playing, you know, it's kind of similar to the one I have on my website, obviously with a few adaptations, opting for 2 Sirocco and then, you know, the 3 Vayu. I really like that. You know, you definitely don't need the higher ratio that I had on the website. Also, Plague Spreader is a very necessary addition. I think Deck Devi is super smart. This is like a good meta for like Deck Devi to be really strong, and so this is like really abusable since you're already on Sirocco and, you know, you got the Vayus. But this deck was performing really well. We caught it on stream, I think, a couple times. So if you're interested in how those games went, feel free to check it out. But it was a really well-performing list, and I definitely thought it deserved some like credit or some of the spotlight. Even though it didn't quite make top cut, it was still really, really cool. And it was, you know, one of the very few people who have actually tried to make Vayu Turbo work. I have not seen people actually put this deck to the test, and this was very promising. I think this shows a lot of promise for the deck. I do think this deck is strong, and it just needs the right build, and this could be the right build, or at least very close to it. Here we have another deck that just barely bubbled, and this was like insane because I've never seen this deck actually perform, you know, like I've seen a lot of people try to make this work, but they never quite could. And this is Sycon's GenX list. You know, Sycon obviously already qualified, so they're full sending on some spicy lists, and we have, you know, just the GenX stuff right here where it's basically just playing off of Ultimate Offering. I also see a little spicy chain summoning there, which I'm not sure how this works, but I'm sure it does, you know? I'm not sure. Honestly, I know very little about this deck, but I did think it was really cool to see that this deck just almost made it into top cut of like a pretty good sized tournament, right? You know, like the fact that it's just GenX, and again, I've just never seen anyone manage to make this list or this deck work. Very low monster count, which is surprising when like the win con is Ultimate Offering. I feel like that had to have gatekeeped them a bit, but again, it did perform well. I saw it catch some wins. I saw it do some OTKs, do some spicy things. It was pretty cool. My favorite play was an Ultimate Offering to normal summon Sangan and then torrential his opponent's board. That was pretty cool. During the battle phase, it was pretty sick. But yeah, definitely want to give Sycon some credit. Not easy to even get close to topping with GenX, but to just barely bubble is pretty impressive. Coming in to the top 8, we are on 8th place, and you already know it's your boy Shinusla playing his standard TG stun. You know, honestly, he already posted it in the Tengu Plant Discord to the TG channel, and he's like, yeah, it's not really anything crazy. I don't think there's like any changes made from like his previous list. I could be wrong. He can correct me. But yeah, this is very basic TG stun. You know, we even got the OG breaker in the side. He's won with this list before, but yeah, I mean, it looks pretty good. I think this is a very reliable way to approach building the deck. But yeah, I think it's pretty cool. One thing I will say is with Dragoonides kind of being on the rise, you know, when I was in California, I saw a TG stun player side Smashing Grounds to deal with Dark Samorg in the event that some people are running it, and I think that's like technically a viable strategy or a decent idea if you wanted to update anything, but you know, to each their own. Either way, congrats to Shinusla making top 8. Shinusla always a strong contender, already qualified for Worlds, so he's going to be there and putting up a fight in that tournament later this year, which is really cool. So moving on to 7th, 8th, or whatever, we have Loofbone. The two control decks, they got slapped into just out of reach of qualifying. You know, I mean, Shinusla already has his Worlds qualifier, so he couldn't qualify anyway, but we have Loofbone, who was the one person who fell short. We had 6 invites to give out in this tournament, and so, you know, tragic for Loofbone being the one who didn't quite get in there. But we have Gravekeepers, and this is basically the exact list of Himne, or very similar. I don't even know what the difference would be. I couldn't tell you. But this is the Turbo Gravekeeper build. I think this is the correct way to build Gravekeepers. I know Loofbone had some really weird hands in like Top Cut, where like they saw like triple Rite of Spirit really early and stuff like that. So I think the list just kind of fell apart for them in Top Cut for some reason. Just a bit of unluck. But overall, this is the pretty standard way to approach building Gravekeepers now, and it's honestly reliably pretty good. We saw the turn 1 Royal Tribute drop on a few decks. It was pretty cool on stream. But yeah, other than that, I mean, it's like I said, it's pretty much the standard Himne Gravekeepers we've seen before, which is pretty cool. But, you know, congrats to them for making it into top 8. Super sorry that you couldn't quite push it over the edge to get that qualifier. But, hey, there's always the next tournament, you know what I'm saying? So, all right, so we are moving into 5th, 6th, and this deck did get its qualifier. It did manage to make it into the top cut, and we have Alucard, who was on Crusher Control. And this list, like I said, this deck has been kind of impressing me. It does really well, and I think part of it is just Dad is really broken. I saw on stream a Crusher Control player, or no, it wasn't Crusher Control, but I saw on stream someone play Dad and pop 3 cards in that turn. Like, it was like Starlight Road, Mirror Force, and something else, and it was just kind of crazy how good this card is. And this is one of the best decks that like sets that up. Obviously, Ultimate Offering is seeing a lot of play and is really insane. But yeah, we are definitely seeing some improvements on the Crusher Control list, you know, where a lot of people are optimizing this down to a science, and this is a pretty strong variant of it. I definitely like the approach. I like what we're doing. You know, most of the cards, the normal summons are all really good. Mystic Tomato is going to get you to the Crusher, which is really nice. You got the single black salvo for cool level 7 synchro plays, and then of course you have Tour Guide, which like Crusher plus Tour Guide goes really hard, especially when people are going to try to like banish this and stuff. You can just like bring it back, or if you banish it with your own like BLS or Dad. But you know, basically all the normal summons in this deck are very, very potent. Like, every card is just, like, relatively useful. It's not bad. You know, I mean, you either stick a Thunder King, you know, Tour Guide can create plays, but just, like, the fact that all these cards are, like, pretty good on their own, and then you tag that along with the fact that Crusher gets to pop a card your opponent controls when you're summoning a Dark alongside it, goes pretty hard. With triple Veiler and the double Thunder King, you now get access to BLS. Like, you get the 2 best boss monsters in the entire game in your deck, so it's pretty cool. Really happy to see people are still exploring with this deck, and I'm excited to see where it goes. I think this deck does actually have a decent amount of potential. I've played against it and have gotten absolutely cooked by it before. It is pretty strong, so glad to see it actually make it into Top Cut and do pretty well. Moving on to the only person who did not submit a dueling book link. We have Hats and Houses, who played Karakuri. The only Karakuri player did make it into Top Cut. I think this deck is really strong. I've said it before. Very underrated. People just do not really appreciate how good this deck actually is. We're on a very interesting build, though. We're opting for 2 enemy controller, and I would love to know, like, Hats and Houses, if you are watching this video, please let me know, like, how this tested for you, because I've kind of considered enemy controller in this deck before. Like, I mean, I love the card. I think enemy controller is absurdly broken, but the issue I have with Karakuri is outside of exactly Nanishi, you're not really putting more than 1 monster on the field, so like I wonder how useful the effect is. I'm not really sure, so yeah, I'm genuinely very curious to know how this tested for you. But for the most part, you know, we're opting for the ideal ratios. You know, we got 3 of the Recruiter. You always play 3 of the Recruiter. It's the best Karakuri, guys. Into the Hypa. You know, I'm liking how we're approaching this list. I'm liking the monster count and whatnot. Minus the Sin. You know, the double Maxi over 2 Veiler. You know, or 3 Veiler in main. What are you going to do? But it doesn't matter. Regardless, it's a pretty cool list. I'm personally not a fan of duality in Karakuri. Again, I'm really curious how this went. But pretty standard build. Looking pretty good. Glad to see some Karakuri representation because it certainly needs more. The extra deck is pretty spicy with that Colossal Fighter in there. Not sure how that worked because we're also not on Landois. And in my opinion, Landois is like one of the best cards in Karakuri. Like, that card is so good. Helps you play around Gores. Sets you up to deal with like Chaos monsters like Chaos Orc or something when you summon it on the field. It puts your opponent in a weird spot. Landois certainly does. And especially because it's always playing off what's in your hand and they have no certainty of how many spells are in your hand. So I really like Landois, so I'm not sure why we opted to cut that too. But overall, pretty okay list, you know. Some cards I disagree with. I certainly would add Landois to the mix over the Colossal Fighter. I don't know how often you're summoning this. But yeah, congrats to Hats and Houses for making top 8. Really cool to see the Karakuri representation. We'll move on to the next one. So into top 4, we had Tengulik, who is playing Cat Sith Chaos Control. This is pretty much your standard Cat Sith deck at this point. We're opting for 2 Spirit Reaper, which is a little interesting. I'm not sure why we did that. Over the 3rd Chaos Orc. I actually feel like the 3rd Chaos Orc is kind of important in this deck. You really want to be able to summon as many of these as possible. This card's obviously very broken, very good. It's a like key tool of removal, and you get your grave filled so fast with Tour Guide and like Kushano and stuff like that. So curious as to why we cut down the ratio for the extra copy of Spirit Reaper. I mean, Spirit Reaper is good, and I saw it come in clutch a lot for a lot of people today, so I could be wrong. So I'm interested why we opted for that ratio. But overall, pretty standard lineup from what we've seen before from like the likes of Janky. We got Green Kappa in the side. You know, we can pop 2 Spell and Traps. I'm curious about why people side this card because I'd be spooked of Starlight Road. I guess if it's like destroyed, then it's like damage step, so you're chilling. But yeah, I mean, we got Mind Crush. Mind Crush was also really big over this weekend. I like that we have the Fabled Raging in the extra. Oh, you make it with the like Scapegoat and stuff like that, I'm assuming. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So you can make it with Scapegoat, draw some cards, kind of access deeper into your deck. We got Legacy of Yada just to draw some cards, which is kind of cool. But yeah, overall, pretty sick to see this deck continuing to find success. I think Cat Sith is one of like those really cool cards that recently started seeing exploration, and it has a lot of potential in a lot of different decks, even just beyond like the standard Cat Sith Chaos deck. So yeah. All right, into top 4, Necro's deck of playing the zombies. The Necro special is back. He was running zombies, the deck that he claims is not tier 1 and yet still always manages to make top cut with it in tournaments. So I don't know what that's about, but you know, we got the, like, this is like his kind of like slow burn control package. He plays this deck really, you know, really slowly. I personally don't like Book of Life over the likes of Call the Haunted. I understand why he does it. It does come up relevant, but I hate bricking on this card personally, but I know that for Necro's playstyle, this card is probably pretty optimal. But yeah, this deck was cool to watch. We caught a few games of it on stream. You know, I'm a huge fan of zombies in this format. I think zombies are actually very good. And, you know, they're just kind of tough to pilot. And Necro is one of those players that pilots his deck beautifully, so it's always fun to watch him play in tournament. And he got his Worlds qualifier spot, so we might see a little more zombie action at Worlds, which I'm excited about. You know, we got the, like I said, it's the Necro special. I would be ecstatic to see how far he can take this deck or even elevate the deck, but this is the deck that Necro has been playing for a very, very long time. And yeah, so pretty standard for the most part. We got like a lot of one-offs in the extra, and I feel like, you know, I used to be hard against one-offs in the side deck, I mean, but they've kind of grown on me. I like having that like one tech card where you're like, okay, I'll slap this in or make it more generic for like going first versus second. But yeah, congrats to Necro taking zombies, being the guy to take zombies up into the top cut of the tournament. You know, I'm always loving to see it. The only zombie player and making it in the top 4. That's honestly a very impressive run. All right, so down to the top 2, and this is where top 2 got pretty meta, I guess you could say. I mean, a lot of people were, you know, a lot of these decks saw representation. These were the 2 that made it through. So we have Sambu Pesteno. I have no idea what that is, or I don't know. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. But they were playing Hero Stun, and this is pretty much your standard Hero Stun list. I mean, there's not a lot of room for creativity with this deck, so it's nothing we haven't seen before. Looking pretty standard, but yeah, that's about all there is. I don't even see any like fancy tech cards or anything. Got the 2 Valor in main over the 2 Skill Drain, which is kind of interesting, but I mean, I'm always a huge fan of Valor, so I never blame people for doing that. I do think Skill Drain is pretty potent, in especially in the current meta. If people are going to be like spamming agents and stuff like that, this card goes so hard versus agents, so I do kind of like Skill Drain in the main, but that's just me. But yeah, other than that, it's pretty basic. The next 2 decks, like this deck and the winning deck, were very basic, very standard decks we've seen before, so we'll just jump on to the next one. Our Tengumania 6 champion was Raikoko, who was playing agents, and if you guys remember my video of how to beat agents in Tengu plans, like this, like the example list I used was basically this list, with the exception of, instead of Treacherous Trap Hole, we have a Dust Shoot and a Mirror Force, so just slightly changing it up. But yeah, this is like as standard of agents as you could get, managing to take the dub, you know. And like I said, there's really just not much to say about it. It's just your standard agent build. But yeah, congrats for taking first. We got the dub on him, you know, qualifying for Worlds. Cool to see. But yeah, I think we'll kind of just like wrap this video up by kind of going back and talking about the metagame, because again, a lot of people will read into agents winning this event as like, oh, it's insane. But like, I look at this and I see, hey, we have 9 agents lists and 1 made it into top cut. We had 7 Tengu plant lists and not a single one of them made it into top cut. Those conversion rates aren't super good. So I talk about this a lot. I talked about it a lot on stream even. A lot of people put these decks on a pedestal, and quite frankly, I just don't think the results actually speak for their strength. Like, I feel like it's, you know, the fact that we had one Karakuri player make it into top cut, we had one zombie player make it into top cut. It was like the only one playing the deck and they make it into top cut. To me, I feel like that's a statement that, you know, the format is still not quite fully explored and that these decks maybe aren't as strong as people think they are. So that is something to kind of consider when looking at YCS Vegas. My advice would be not to, you know, all in on Tengu Plan's Agents, assuming it's just going to catch you free dubs, because I just genuinely don't think it will. But that's just my personal opinion. We can definitely look and see, like, use this as a tool of representation for, like, upcoming events. You know, like I said, I mean, Tengu Plans and Agents will always see high representation, but we are seeing a lot of Hero as well as Cat Sith Chaos is kind of popping off. But there are some decks to consider. You know, TG Stun's all obviously very good, very popular as well. But, you know, like I said, Crusher Control doing pretty well, you know, coming in as like 2 and, you know, making into top cut just with 2 decks in the pool. That's pretty impressive. Even Cat Sith Control or Cat Sith Chaos is like one that I know is getting pretty popular among people, and this deck is doing pretty well as well. But yeah, pretty interesting tournament, like, especially just how we didn't actually have a deck repeat all the way through top cut, you know? So, like, there was one agent list, one hero list, one zombie list, one Cat Sith Chaos, one Karakuri, one Crusher Control, one Gravekeeper, one TG agent, and then, you know, one TG, and then you go down to the bubble decks, and, like, they were all vastly different as well. It's really cool to see. This is my kind of tournament. I love seeing a big diverse pool of decks, just because there's so many decks in this format that are just so strong, guys. So there's a lot to consider, especially if you are, you know, looking at this for guidance on what to play at Vegas. You know, pick a deck you like and, you know, just full send on it. Don't worry about what you hear other people say about it. Just give it a go, and if you put enough effort and energy into it, you can make it work, and I think that's really cool. But other than that, guys, I think that is going to wrap it up for this video. So I am going to give a quick shout out to my Patreon. So shout out to Grant Johnson, Beast Eyes, Slap God, My Dude, Photo Shooty, Brian Ford, and Sven Albrehen. Thank you guys so much for the support. Without you, this would not be possible, and we have seen so much growth from Tengu Plant format as a result of that, so I genuinely really appreciate it. But other than that, thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know in the comments what you think about these deck lists, and make sure you guys have a great time dueling today.